"Daddy, you finally visited Mommy's grave," said the homeless girl to the millionaire. At first, he thinks it's a mistake. He doesn't know this child. But something about her face, something about her eyes, stops him cold. Then he sees the name on the grave, the name of the woman he once loved, and suddenly everything he thought he knew begins to crumble. Why does this little girl claim he's her father? And what secrets did her mother take to the grave? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Cole's penthouse, each drop racing down the glass like tears. He jolted awake in his leather armchair, his breath catching in his throat. The same dream again. The woman in the rain, her face both familiar and strange, her words echoing in his mind. "Come back." Ethan's hands trembled as he reached for the crystal decanter on the side table. The amber liquid splashed into his glass, more than he'd intended. The clock on the wall showed 3:27 a.m., the third time this month he'd woken at this exact hour, drenched in cold sweat, his heart pounding. The Seattle skyline stretched out before him, a maze of lights blurred by the rainfall. His penthouse, usually a sanctuary of modern minimalism and carefully curated comfort, felt suffocating tonight. The sleek furniture and stark white walls that normally brought him peace now seemed to mock him with their emptiness. His gaze drifted to the envelope on his desk. It had arrived 3 weeks ago, plain and white, with no return address. He'd left it there, untouched, like a time bomb he was afraid to defuse. But tonight, something was different. The dream felt more real, more urgent. Ethan set down his scotch and walked to the desk, his bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. He picked up the envelope, turning it over in his hands. The paper was expensive, the kind used for formal announcements. With unsteady fingers, he broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. 2 lines of text, nothing more. Amelia Warren, resting at Rose Hill Cemetery. The name struck something deep within him, like a bell ringing in an empty church. Amelia Warren. He mouthed the words, testing them. They felt both foreign and achingly familiar on his tongue. He spent the rest of the night pacing, the letter clutched in his hand, trying to piece together why this name wouldn't let him go. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in shades of pearl and gold, he made a decision. The drive to Rose Hill Cemetery took 40 minutes. The rain had stopped, but heavy clouds still hung low, threatening more to come. Ethan parked his Tesla at the cemetery entrance, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He sat there for several minutes watching an elderly groundskeeper tend to fresh flowers on a nearby grave. "What am I doing here?" he muttered to himself, but he knew he had to go in. The dream, the letter, the name, it all pulled at him like an invisible thread. The cemetery paths wound between ancient oaks and maple trees, their leaves beginning to turn golden with the approach of fall. His Italian leather shoes sank slightly into the damp earth as he walked, reading headstone after headstone. The air smelled of wet grass and chrysanthemums. Row after row, he searched. His tech-savvy mind, used to instant results and digital efficiency, struggled with this analog task. But something kept him going, a compulsion he couldn't explain. His usual logical approach to problems seemed useless here. Then he saw it. Amelia Grace Warren. Beloved mother, beloved artist. 1986 to 2022. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the simple granite headstone. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and suddenly he couldn't breathe. Images flooded his mind. A sketch pad with delicate drawings, paint-stained fingers, a laugh like wind chimes, the smell of lavender. His knees gave way and he found himself kneeling in the damp grass. His fingers traced the engraved letters, and each touch sent shock waves through his body. Memories he didn't know he had started breaking through like sunlight through storm clouds. A summer day at a coffee shop. A woman with auburn hair bent over a sketchbook. Her smile when she looked up and caught him watching her. Their first conversation about art and technology. How different their worlds were, how perfectly they seemed to fit together anyway. More memories crashed over him. Picnics in the park, lazy Sunday mornings, her painting while he worked on his laptop, both comfortable in their shared silence. Her voice, soft and sure, telling him she loved him. The way she looked in the morning light, her hair spread across his pillow. "How?" he whispered to the headstone. "How did I forget you?" His father's voice echoed in his mind. "The accident was severe, son. The doctors say some memory loss is normal. Focus on your recovery, on the company. That's what matters now." Had it all been a lie? The years of therapy, the carefully constructed narrative of his life after the car accident? The controlling father who had shaped his recovery, his return to work, his entire life since then? The sound of footsteps on grass behind him barely registered. But then a small voice, clear as a bell, cut through his swirling thoughts. "Daddy, you finally visited Mommy's grave." Ethan turned, still on his knees, to face the source of those world-shattering words. There stood a small girl, maybe 11 or 12, her feet bare despite the cold, her dark hair tangled as if she'd been running through the wind. She stared at him with eyes he recognized from his own reflection, but it was Amelia's gentle expression he saw in the child's face, Amelia's artistic soul evident in the paint stains on her oversized sweater. She looked at him like she'd been waiting forever, like she'd never lost faith that this moment would come. Ethan stared at the small girl, his mind struggling to process her words. She stood there, barefoot on the damp grass, wearing clothes that seemed too big for her thin frame. Despite the chill in the air, she didn't shiver. I think you're mistaken," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. "I don't have any children." The girl took a step closer, her eyes, his eyes, fixed on his face. "I'm Lily," she said softly. "I'm 6. She spoke with a certainty that made his chest tighten, as if she were stating simple facts like the color of the sky or the wetness of the grass beneath her feet. Ethan stood up slowly, brushing dirt from his knees. His legs felt unsteady, and his head spun with too many questions. "Listen, Lily," he said, trying to keep his voice gentle but firm. "There must be some mistake. Where are your parents?" Lily's expression didn't change. She simply pointed to Amelia's headstone and then back to him. The gesture was so matter-of-fact, so certain, that it sent a chill down his spine. He turned and began walking back toward the cemetery entrance, his shoes squeaking slightly on the wet grass. The sound of small footsteps behind him made him pause and look back. Lily followed, her bare feet making no sound at all. She matched his pace perfectly, keeping a careful distance, not too close, not too far. "You shouldn't follow me," he said, but his words lacked conviction. She said nothing, just kept walking, her eyes focused on some point in the distance. When they reached his Tesla, Ethan pulled out his phone and Googled child services. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed the number. The operator's voice was professional but warm, advising him to take the child to the nearest police station. They would send someone to meet them there. "Lily," he said, turning to face her. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe, okay? People who can help find your family." She nodded once but said nothing. When he opened the car door, she climbed in without hesitation, buckling her seatbelt as if she'd done it 1,000 times before. The drive to the police station was silent. In his rearview mirror, Ethan watched Lily stare out the window, her expression thoughtful. She seemed completely at ease, as if being driven by a stranger was the most natural thing in the world. The Seattle Police Department building loomed ahead, all glass and concrete. Ethan parked and helped Lily out of the car. Her small hand slipped into his automatically as they walked toward the entrance, and he found himself unable to pull away. Inside, fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across worn linoleum floors. A tired-looking officer at the front desk looked up as they approached. Ethan explained the situation while Lily stood quietly beside him, still holding his hand. More officers appeared. They led Lily to a room with bright posters and colorful chairs, a space designed to be less intimidating for children. Ethan watched through a window as they questioned her gently. She answered each question with the same calm certainty she'd shown at the cemetery. Hours passed. Officers ran searches, made calls, checked databases. Ethan sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, watching people hurry back and forth with papers and concerned expressions. Someone brought him coffee. Someone else asked him the same questions again and again. No match in any database, no birth certificate, no school records, no medical history, no missing persons report. According to every official record, Lily didn't exist. The only thing she possessed was a small necklace with a rusted heart-shaped locket. When they tried to examine it, she clutched it tightly and shook her head. It was the first time she'd shown any emotion since the cemetery. The sun had long since set when a weary-looking officer approached Ethan. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she'd been working well past her shift. "Mr. Cole," she said, rubbing her temples, "we've exhausted all our immediate options. She's not in our system. There's no one looking for her. Technically, she's yours now." "What do you mean, mine?" Ethan asked, his voice cracking slightly. "You found her. She claims you're her father. Until we can verify otherwise or locate another guardian, you're her de facto caregiver." The officer handed him a stack of temporary custody papers. "We'll keep investigating, but for now." Ethan looked through the window at Lily, who sat drawing with crayons someone had given her. His head throbbed with questions he couldn't answer. "There's a motel just down the street," the officer suggested kindly. "Get some rest. We'll call if we find anything." The motel room was clean but sparse. 2 beds with faded floral comforters, a small TV, and a bathroom with flickering fluorescent lights. Lily walked in and immediately climbed onto the bed farthest from the door. She curled up on its edge, still fully dressed, and stared out the window at the city lights. Ethan sat on the other bed, his suit wrinkled, his tie long since discarded. The events of the day felt surreal. The cemetery, the memories that had crashed over him, this small girl who claimed to be his daughter. He watched her breathing slow and even out, though he could tell she wasn't asleep. The sound of her soft breaths in the quiet room broke something inside him. Each inhale and exhale reminded him of Amelia, of memories he shouldn't have forgotten, of a life that had been stolen from him. And now this child, this impossible child who had his eyes and Amelia's gentle presence, lay curled up like a question he couldn't answer. He lay back on his bed, still fully dressed, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. Sleep felt impossible, but exhaustion pulled at his limbs. Lily's quiet breathing continued, steady and sure, like a metronome marking time in a song he'd forgotten how to play. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the thin motel curtains, casting a pale glow across Ethan's face. He stirred, his body stiff from sleeping in his clothes. The events of yesterday felt like a strange dream until his eyes snapped open, suddenly remembering Lily. He bolted upright, heart pounding. The other bed was empty, its covers barely disturbed. His breath caught in his throat as he scanned the small room. The bathroom door stood open, lights off. "Lily?" His voice cracked with panic. No answer. Ethan jumped up, not bothering with shoes. He rushed out of the room, the concrete walkway cold and rough against his bare feet. The morning air bit at his skin through his wrinkled dress shirt. "Lily!" he called out, scanning the nearly empty parking lot. A few early risers loading their cars turned to look at him, but no small girl in sight. His mind raced. The cemetery. Of course, where else would she go? He sprinted to his car, ignoring the strange looks from other motel guests. The key fob trembled in his hand as he unlocked the door. The drive to Rose Hill Cemetery took less than 10 minutes, but each second stretched like an hour. He barely remembered to put the car in park before jumping out, his bare feet now crunching on gravel. The morning dew soaked through his pant legs as he ran across the grass weaving between headstones. Relief flooded through him when he spotted her small figure in the distance. Lily sat cross-legged in front of Amelia's grave, her head bowed slightly as if in deep conversation. Her voice carried faintly on the morning breeze. "And then he came just like you said he would," she was saying softly. "But he doesn't remember, Mommy. Not yet." Ethan slowed his approach, his heart still racing but for different reasons now. The intimacy of the moment struck him. This little girl talking to her mother's grave as naturally as if they were having breakfast together. "Lily," he called out gently, not wanting to startle her. She turned, unsurprised by his presence. "Good morning, Daddy." The word hit him like a physical blow. He stepped closer, his feet now numb from the cold ground. "Why do you keep calling me that?" His voice came out harsher than he intended. "How can you be so sure?" Lily's small hands went to her neck, where the rusted heart locket hung. With careful fingers, she opened it. The hinges creaked softly. From inside, she extracted a tiny folded photograph, handling it with such gentleness that Ethan found himself holding his breath. "Here," she said, holding it out to him. Ethan took the photo, his fingers trembling slightly as he unfolded it. The paper was worn at the creases, as if it had been opened and closed countless times. His heart stopped when he saw the image. It showed him and Amelia, younger and carefree, laughing at what he instantly recognized as the Seattle Summer Fair. Her head was thrown back in mid-laugh, dark hair catching the sunlight. His arm was around her waist, his own face lit with joy. He remembered that day perfectly, the sticky sweetness of cotton candy, the way Amelia had screamed on the Ferris wheel, how they'd spent their last dollar trying to win a stuffed penguin. But he didn't remember anyone taking this photo, and he certainly didn't remember giving it to Amelia. "How?" he started, his throat tight. "Where did you get this?" "Mommy wore it every day," Lily said simply, touching the locket. "She said you were her what if. That's all I knew about you, this picture. She never told me your name, just your face." Ethan stared at the photo, then at Lily. In the morning light, the resemblance was undeniable. His eyes, Amelia's gentle expression, the careful way she held herself, just like her mother. He sank to his knees in the wet grass, the photo trembling in his hands. "I don't understand," he whispered, more to himself than to Lily. "I don't remember." "Mommy said that might happen," Lily replied softly. "She said sometimes people forget things that hurt too much." Back at the motel, Ethan watched Lily curl up for a nap, exhausted from their early morning cemetery visit. She'd fallen asleep clutching the locket, her small face peaceful despite everything. He pulled out his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keyboard for a moment before typing Amelia Warren obituary into the search bar. The results loaded quickly, and there it was, dated 7 months ago. Amelia Grace Warren, aged 31, passed away after a lengthy illness at Seattle General Hospital. A gifted artist and beloved mother, she touched many lives with her gentle spirit and unwavering kindness. She is survived by no listed relatives. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the Children's Art Therapy Program at Seattle General. Ethan read the words over and over, his mind struggling to make sense of them. No listed relatives. But Lily was here, real and alive, with his eyes and Amelia's smile. And that photo, a moment he remembered with perfect clarity, but somehow couldn't explain. He opened another tab and began searching through old records, looking for anything about Amelia Warren from the past 7 years. Hospital records, address changes, employment history, fragments of a life he should have known about but didn't. Something wasn't adding up, and the missing pieces felt like shadows at the edge of his memory, just out of reach. The morning sun cast long shadows across the city as Ethan guided his car through the early traffic. In the passenger seat, Lily sat quietly, her small hands folded in her lap, the heart locket gleaming against her worn sweater. She hadn't asked where they were going, just climbed into the car trustingly when he'd helped her buckle up. Ethan glanced at her in the rearview mirror, struck again by how composed she seemed for such a young child. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, his most trusted employee at the tech company. She was already waiting at the bookstore cafe where they'd agreed to meet. The cafe sat nestled between tall buildings, its warm lights glowing invitingly through large windows. Potted plants and comfortable chairs created a cozy atmosphere that seemed to put Lily at ease. As they walked in, the smell of fresh coffee and pastries filled the air. Sarah stood up from her corner table, her professional demeanor softening when she saw Lily. She'd worked with Ethan for 5 years, managing his schedule and keeping his life organized. If anyone could be trusted with this situation, it was her. "Hi there," Sarah said warmly, kneeling to Lily's eye level. "I'm Sarah. I brought some books and coloring supplies. Would you like to see them?" Lily looked up at Ethan, waiting for his approval. He nodded, surprised by how much that small gesture of trust affected him. "I need to take care of something important," he explained gently. "Sarah will stay with you and I'll be back soon. Is that okay?" "Promise?" Lily asked, her voice small but steady. "Promise," Ethan replied, the word feeling heavier than he'd expected. He watched as Lily settled into a big armchair, Sarah already showing her a collection of children's books. Something twisted in his chest as he turned away, but he forced himself to walk out the door. He had to know the truth. The drive to Riverside Memorial Hospital took almost 3 hours. The familiar countryside rolled past his window, farms, small towns, and finally the college town where he'd spent his early 20s, where he'd met Amelia. The memories felt both crystal clear and strangely distant, like looking at old photographs through frosted glass. The hospital looked exactly the same, its brick facade weathered but solid. Ethan parked in the visitor's lot, his hands gripping the steering wheel for a moment before he could make himself let go. Inside, the antiseptic smell and fluorescent lighting brought a wave of undefined anxiety. At the nurse's station, he asked for records from 7 years ago. The young nurse started to refuse, but an older woman looked up sharply at the sound of his voice. She studied his face, her eyes widening with recognition. "My word," she said softly, coming around the desk. "You're the one from the car wreck. We thought you wouldn't make it." Her name tag read Margaret, and though her hair had gone completely gray, her eyes were sharp and clear. Ethan's throat felt dry. I don't remember much about that time." Margaret nodded sympathetically. "That's not surprising, dear. You were in a coma for weeks. The memory loss, the months of rehabilitation. It was a long road back." She led him to a small consultation room and pulled out a thick file. "I kept copies of some of the old records," she explained. "Sometimes families want to know later on." Ethan's hands shook slightly as he read through the medical reports. Multiple fractures, severe head trauma, prolonged unconsciousness, retrograde amnesia. The clinical terms described a broken body he couldn't remember inhabiting. "What about—" He swallowed hard. "Was there a woman named Amelia? Amelia Warren?" Margaret's face softened with something like sadness. "Oh yes, she came here every single day. Sat right by your bed, talking to you, reading to you. Even when the doctors weren't sure you'd wake up, she never lost hope. But she wasn't here when I woke up," Ethan said, the words tasting bitter. "No," Margaret replied quietly. "Your father had you transferred to a private facility. Very suddenly. She came in that morning and you were just gone." The older nurse reached into the file and pulled out a worn piece of paper, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. "She left this note, asked me to give it to you if you ever came back." Ethan took the paper carefully as if it might crumble in his hands. The handwriting was delicate but determined. "Tell Ethan I'll wait. Always." "She was here every day?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Margaret nodded. "Rain or shine, she'd bring her sketchbook, fill it with drawings of you. Said she wanted to remember every moment, even the hard ones. She was—" The nurse paused, choosing her words carefully. She was in a delicate condition by then, but she never missed a day. Ethan's world tilted on its axis. Delicate condition. Lily would have been born about 7 months after the accident. The timeline clicked into place with devastating clarity. He thanked Margaret mechanically, clutching the note as he walked back to his car. The afternoon sun was harsh in his eyes as he sat in the driver's seat, reading Amelia's words over and over until they blurred. His hands trembled as the truth sank in. It was never Amelia who had disappeared. It was him. His father, always so controlling, so concerned with the family's reputation, had simply moved him away while he was unconscious, had erased Amelia from his life while he couldn't protest, couldn't remember, couldn't fight back. Meanwhile, at the bookstore cafe, Lily sat at a small table near the window, surrounded by colored pencils and paper. Sarah watched with quiet amazement as the little girl drew with careful concentration, her small tongue sticking out slightly as she worked. The cashier, a friendly woman with curly hair, came over to refill Sarah's coffee and peered at Lily's drawing. "What are you making there, sweetie?" Lily held up her paper proudly. 3 stick figures stood holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "This is Mommy," she pointed to the tallest figure with long dark hair. "This is me," she indicated the smallest figure in the middle. "And that's Daddy," she finished, pointing to the man-shaped figure on the right. "Is that your dad?" the cashier asked kindly, glancing toward the door where Ethan had left hours ago. Lily looked down at her drawing, a small, knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "He doesn't know yet," she said simply, and went back to coloring, adding flowers around the 3 figures' feet. The evening sun had already set when Ethan pulled into the motel parking lot, his mind still reeling from everything he'd learned at the hospital. The neon vacancy sign cast a soft red glow across the wet pavement as he made his way to their room. Inside, the small space was quiet except for Lily's gentle breathing. She lay curled up on the far side of the bed, using her worn coat as a makeshift blanket. Her small form looked so vulnerable in the dim light that it made his chest ache. Sarah had texted earlier to say Lily had been well-behaved all day, mostly drawing and reading quietly until Ethan returned to pick her up. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, trying not to disturb her sleep. The note from the hospital felt heavy in his pocket. Taking it out, he smoothed the creased paper under the yellow lamplight. Amelia's handwriting was exactly as he remembered it. Gentle curves and deliberate strokes, each letter formed with artistic care. "Tell Ethan I'll wait. Always." The familiar sight of her penmanship hit him like a physical blow. Memories flooded back, notes left in his textbooks during college, little drawings in the margins of her letters, the way she'd sketch on any available surface when inspiration struck. His vision blurred as he traced the words with his finger, feeling the slight indentations her pen had left in the paper. Something broke inside him then, a dam of emotions he hadn't even known he was holding back. He pressed his hand to his mouth to muffle the sound of his ragged breathing, not wanting to wake Lily. All these years he'd lived with a void he couldn't name, a sense of something missing that he'd attributed to the accident. But it wasn't the trauma that had left that hole. It was Amelia's absence, carefully engineered by his own father. The next morning, after making sure Lily had breakfast, Ethan sat in his car and stared at his phone. His father's number seemed to mock him from the screen. Taking a deep breath, he pressed call before he could talk himself out of it. Richard Cole answered on the third ring, his voice as formal and clipped as ever. "Ethan, this is unexpected." "Dad," Ethan said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I need to ask you something. Did you ever hear from Amelia after the accident?" The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tension. When Richard finally spoke, his words were flat and cold. "She was irrelevant. I handled what you couldn't." The casual dismissal in his father's tone made Ethan's blood run cold. Without another word, he ended the call and started the engine. The drive to his father's estate took less than an hour, but every minute felt like an eternity as anger built inside him. The mansion looked exactly as it always had: immaculate gardens, pristine white columns, everything in its proper place. Richard's executive assistant tried to stop him as he strode through the front door, but Ethan ignored her protests and headed straight for his father's study. The room was empty when he entered, sunlight streaming through tall windows onto shelves of leather-bound books and carefully arranged awards. Ethan went straight to the large desk, pulling open drawers with trembling hands. In the bottom right drawer, behind a stack of files, he found it, a worn shoebox that seemed out of place among his father's meticulously organized belongings. His heart nearly stopped when he lifted the lid. Letters. Dozens of them, all addressed to him in Amelia's distinctive handwriting. Every single one was unopened, the envelopes yellowed with age but intact. With shaking fingers, he opened the first one, dated just weeks after the accident. Photos spilled out onto the desk. Amelia, her belly just beginning to show, standing in front of their old apartment building. Another showed her further along, one hand resting protectively over her stomach as she smiled at the camera. The note attached read simply, "We're waiting." Letter after letter revealed the story his father had hidden. Amelia's hopes, her fears, her unwavering faith that somehow Ethan would remember and return to them. The last envelope contained a photo of a newborn Lily, tiny and perfect, with the words "She has your eyes" written on the back. He heard his father's footsteps in the hallway but didn't look up. Instead, he gathered the letters and photos, letting them fall onto the polished surface of Richard's desk. "You erased her," Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. "You erased my daughter." Richard stood in the doorway, his expression carefully controlled. "I saved you," he replied, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "You were too weak to let go of a woman with nothing to offer." The casual cruelty of those words made Ethan physically recoil. Without another word, he walked past his father, his whole body trembling with rage. He could feel Richard's eyes on him as he left, But he didn't look back. The drive back to the motel passed in a blur of anger and grief. When he opened the door to their room, he found Lily standing on tiptoes at the bathroom mirror, drawing patterns in the condensation with her finger. She turned at the sound of his entrance, her face solemn and knowing in a way no 6-year-old should be. "You came back," she said simply, as if she'd been waiting all along. Days later, the morning sun was just beginning to peek through the city buildings when Ethan's car pulled into the parking lot of Westbrook Medical Center, a private clinic known for its discretion and rapid testing services. Lily sat quietly in the passenger seat, her small hands folded in her lap, watching the early morning shadows stretch across the pavement. Ethan helped her out of the car, noticing how her borrowed clothes hung loose on her thin frame. They needed to fix that today. The clinic's automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, welcoming them into a pristine lobby decorated in calming shades of blue and cream. The receptionist, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, looked up from her computer screen. Her gaze moved between Ethan and Lily, taking in their mismatched appearance, him in his expensive business casual wear, her in clothes that had clearly seen better days. "Father and daughter?" she asked, her pen hovering over a form. Ethan felt Lily's small hand slip into his. He looked down at her upturned face, those familiar eyes that had haunted his dreams even before he knew why. His throat tightened. "Yes," he said softly, then cleared his throat. "Yes, we are." The process was quick and painless. The nurse who took their samples was gentle with Lily, making her giggle by pretending the cotton swab was a tiny magic wand. "It's just a science thing," Ethan explained when Lily looked at him questioningly. She nodded, accepting his words without further questions, her trust in him both touching and terrifying. After the clinic, they walked down the busy morning streets. The city was coming alive around them, coffee shops opening their doors, business people hurrying to work, street vendors setting up their carts. Ethan steered them toward a department store he'd noticed earlier. "Let's get you some new clothes," he said, watching Lily's eyes widen at the colorful displays in the windows. Inside, Lily moved through the children's section with careful deliberation, touching fabrics softly as if afraid to disturb them. When she came to a rack of sundresses, her hand lingered on a yellow one with small white daisies around the hem. "Do you like that one?" Ethan asked. Lily nodded, then quickly added, "But we don't have to—" "Try it on," Ethan interrupted gently, taking the dress off the rack. He gathered a few more items, practical things like jeans and t-shirts, warm sweaters, new shoes to replace her worn ones. Each time Lily emerged from the dressing room, her smile grew a little brighter. They left the store with several bags, Lily wearing her new yellow sundress and clean white sneakers. The old clothes went into a donation bin outside the store. As they passed an ice cream parlor, Lily's steps slowed, though she didn't say anything. "Want some ice cream?" Ethan asked. "Can we?" "Of course." Inside, Lily chose strawberry in a waffle cone. When the server looked at Ethan expectantly, Lily tugged on his sleeve. "You should get one too," she insisted, her voice earnest. "Mommy always said ice cream makes everything better." Something caught in Ethan's chest at her words. He ordered vanilla, and they sat at a small table by the window. As they ate, Ethan watched Lily carefully catching drips with her napkin, her legs swinging beneath her chair. "Lily," he said carefully, "do you remember where you were born?" She looked up from her ice cream, considering the question. "No," she said finally with a small shrug. "Mommy and I just kept moving. We stayed in lots of places." "What kind of places?" "Sometimes motels. Sometimes nice ladies would let us stay with them for a while. Once we lived in a church basement for 3 whole months." She said this matter-of-factly, as if it were perfectly normal. The pastor's wife taught me how to draw flowers. Ethan's mind raced, piecing together the implications. Amelia had been running or hiding, maybe both. But from what? From whom? His father's influence reached far, but surely he hadn't. His phone buzzed in his pocket, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed the clinic's number. He answered, turning slightly away from Lily, who was absorbed in finishing her cone. "Mr. Cole?" The voice was professional, efficient. "We have your results. The DNA analysis shows a 99.9% parental match. She's yours." The words hit him like a physical force. Even though he'd known, had felt it in his bones, hearing it confirmed made everything suddenly, overwhelmingly real. He stared at his phone in silence after ending the call, his ice cream forgotten and melting. Back at the motel, Lily disappeared into the bathroom with her new pajamas, soft cotton ones with little stars all over them. Ethan could hear water running as she brushed her teeth, such a normal, domestic sound that it made his heart ache. She leaned out of the bathroom door, toothbrush still in hand, foam at the corners of her mouth. "Will you read to me tonight?" Ethan looked at her, his daughter officially and irrefutably his daughter, and felt something shift and settle in his chest. "Yeah," he whispered, then stronger. "Yeah, I will." The morning sun filtered through the thin motel curtains, casting warm patches of light across the worn carpet. An unfamiliar but pleasant aroma woke Lily from her sleep. She sat up in bed, her new star-covered pajamas slightly rumpled, and rubbed her eyes. The smell was coming from the small kitchenette area where Ethan stood, a look of intense concentration on his face as he studied a box of pancake mix. He had already made several attempts, evidenced by the stack of oddly shaped pancakes on a paper plate beside him. Some were too dark around the edges, others slightly undercooked in the middle. A light dusting of flour covered the counter, and a small splash of batter decorated his expensive dress shirt. Lily slid off the bed quietly, her bare feet padding across the floor. When she reached the small table, Ethan turned around, spatula in hand, and gave her a slightly embarrassed smile. "Good morning," he said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I thought you might be hungry. I'm not very good at this, but the lady at the front desk let me borrow some supplies." Lily climbed onto one of the chairs, her eyes wide as she watched him flip another pancake with careful precision. This one landed perfectly, golden brown on both sides. Ethan's face lit up with pride. "Finally got one right," he muttered, sliding it onto a fresh plate. He added it to a small stack he'd been keeping warm in the microwave, then brought it to the table along with some butter and syrup he'd picked up from the convenience store across the street. "Here you go," he said, setting the plate in front of her. "Sorry if they're not very good. I usually just have coffee for breakfast." Lily picked up her fork and carefully cut into the stack. She took a small bite, chewing thoughtfully. Ethan watched her, holding his breath without realizing it. "These are the best pancakes I've ever had," she declared solemnly, taking another bigger bite. Ethan turned away quickly, pretending to clean up the counter while he blinked rapidly. His throat felt tight, and he had to take several deep breaths before he could speak again. "Eat up," he managed finally. "We need to pack up soon. Checkout time is at 11. While Lily finished her breakfast, Ethan began gathering their things. There wasn't much, just the shopping bags from yesterday and their few personal items. He was folding Lily's old clothes to donate when he heard her rummaging through her small worn backpack. "Oh," she exclaimed softly, pulling something out from the bottom. It was a battered sketchbook, its corners soft and rounded from use, the cover faded and water-stained. She held it carefully, like something precious. "This was Mommy's," she said, walking over to where Ethan stood. "She drew in it all the time. She held it out to him. "I think she'd want you to see it." Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he took the sketchbook. He sat down on the edge of the bed, and Lily climbed up beside him, leaning against his arm as he opened to the first page. The drawings inside were beautiful, done in pencil, some in charcoal, others in colored pencils. They captured moments both real and imagined. There was Lily as a baby, sleeping peacefully. Lily taking her first steps. Lily drawing at a table, her tongue sticking out in concentration. And there were drawings of him, dozens of them, all drawn from memory. Ethan at the carnival where the photo was taken. Ethan laughing, his head thrown back. Ethan reading a book, his brow furrowed in concentration. Some were quick sketches, others carefully detailed studies of his face. But the ones that made his breath catch were the drawings of all three of them together. These were clearly imagined scenes, the family that could have been, the three of them having a picnic in a park, walking on a beach together, holding hands, decorating a Christmas tree. Each drawing was filled with such longing, such hope, that Ethan could barely look at them. He turned to the last page and found an unfinished drawing. It showed him and Lily, holding hands, standing in front of a small house with a garden full of flowers. The details of the house weren't quite complete, and the flowers were just rough outlines waiting to be filled in. But the expressions on their faces were perfectly captured, peaceful, happy, home. Below the drawing, in Amelia's gentle handwriting, was a note. "If she ever finds you before you find her, don't run this time. She's yours too." Ethan closed the sketchbook carefully, holding it against his chest for a moment. Lily watched him, her small face serious and understanding beyond her years. "We're going somewhere special today," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Lily's hand found his, small fingers wrapping around his larger ones with complete trust. "Is it a real home?" she asked softly, hope and uncertainty mingling in her voice. Ethan looked down at their joined hands, then at the sketchbook that held so many dreams, so much love. He thought about the DNA results, about Amelia's note, about all the years lost and found. He thought about the little girl who had walked into his life and turned it upside down, who had helped him remember who he was supposed to be. He hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "Yes," he said. "It is." The small house on Maple Lane sat quietly among towering oak trees, its weathered blue paint and white trim showing signs of neglect. Ethan's car crunched over fallen leaves as they pulled into the gravel driveway. He hadn't been here in years, hadn't even thought about this place since before the accident. It was a modest cottage he'd bought on impulse, dreaming of quiet weekends away from the city. "Is this it?" Lily asked, pressing her nose against the car window. Her breath left small clouds of fog on the glass. "Yeah," Ethan said, studying the familiar yet strange building. "It needs some work, but—" He trailed off, remembering why he'd chosen this place. The garden space, the wraparound porch, the bay window perfect for reading on rainy days. They walked up the creaking steps together, Lily's small hand in his. The key stuck a little in the lock, another thing that needed fixing. When the door finally swung open, dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through dirty windows. The furniture sat draped in white sheets like sleeping ghosts. The air smelled musty, but not unpleasant. Their footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as they explored each room. The cozy living room with its stone fireplace, the kitchen with its vintage appliances, 2 bedrooms upstairs with slanted ceilings. "Can I help clean?" Lily asked, already pulling a sheet off an armchair, sending up a cloud of dust that made her sneeze. Ethan found himself smiling. "Sure, let me see what supplies are still here." They worked together through the afternoon. Ethan found old cleaning supplies in a hall closet, while Lily wielded a broom almost twice her height, determinedly sweeping every corner she could reach. The repetitive motion of cleaning felt therapeutic, like wiping away more than just dust. In the kitchen, Ethan wrestled with a leaking faucet, his expensive watch set carefully aside as he worked with tools he barely remembered how to use. Each turn of the wrench felt like turning back time, remembering skills from before his life became boardrooms and business calls. "Look what I found," Lily called from upstairs. She held up some faded but clean sheets patterned with yellow daisies. "Can these be for my bed?" "Of course," Ethan said, helping her make up the twin bed in what would be her room. The mattress was still good, just needed airing out. Together they tucked in corners and smoothed wrinkles until the bed looked inviting and fresh. Later, while Ethan wiped down windows, Lily wandered into the backyard. He found her kneeling by an overgrown garden patch, pulling weeds with determined little hands. "Mommy loved gardens," she said without looking up. "She always wanted one of her own, but we moved too much." She sat back on her heels, leaving dirty handprints on her new yellow dress. "Could we plant something for her here?" Ethan's throat tightened. "Yeah," he managed. "Yeah, we can do that." They found a packet of wildflower seeds in the garden shed, along with some basic tools. Lily chose a smooth river stone from the border and carefully painted it with some old craft supplies they'd discovered in a drawer. She wrote "For Mommy" in wobbly letters, then decorated it with tiny painted flowers. Together they dug a small hole and planted a few seeds. Lily patted the dirt gently, then placed her painted stone marker beside it. She stood back, studying their work with serious eyes. "Do you think she'll like it?" she asked. Ethan knelt beside her, ignoring the dirt staining his expensive trousers. "I think she'll love it." While Lily took a bath in the newly cleaned tub, Ethan made an important phone call. The lawyer's voice was kind but concerned as she explained the complications they faced. Without proper documentation, birth certificate, social security number, any legal paperwork naming you as the father, establishing guardianship will be challenging, she explained. "We'll need to prove your relationship, possibly involve child services, and there may be questions about why she wasn't registered at birth." Ethan watched through the window as the wind gently moved the garden marker. "What's our first step?" "Come see me tomorrow. We'll start building a case, but Mr. Cole, this won't be simple." After hanging up, Ethan found Lily already in her daisy-patterned bed, hair still damp from her bath, clutching a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are that she'd discovered on a shelf. "Will you read to me?" she asked, scooting over to make room. Ethan sat beside her, opening the familiar book. "The night Max wore his wolf suit," he began, and felt Lily snuggle closer as he read. Halfway through the story, her breathing deepened and her small hand, which had been holding his, went limp. Ethan carefully closed the book and looked down at his daughter, sleeping peacefully beside him. The moonlight streaming through the window cast soft shadows across her face. She looked so much like Amelia when she slept, so vulnerable and trusting. Everything in him ached to protect her, to make up for all the years he hadn't been there. "You're mine," he whispered, gently brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I'm not letting you go again." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, making the painted stone marker by the newly planted seeds shift slightly in the soft dirt. Above the cottage's roof, the first star of evening appeared, bright and steady in the darkening sky. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows of the cottage on Maple Lane, casting warm squares on the worn wooden table where Lily sat drawing. Her small fingers moved deliberately across the paper, creating careful lines with the colored pencils Ethan had found in an old desk drawer. The soft scratching of pencil on paper provided a gentle counterpoint to Ethan's increasingly frustrated voice as he paced the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, I understand the records are old, but there must be something," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Hospital records, tax documents, anything." He listened for a moment, jaw tightening. "No, I don't have her social security number. That's what I'm trying to. Yes, I'll hold. Again." Lily glanced up briefly from her drawing, then returned to her work, seemingly unfazed by the tension in her father's voice. She'd grown used to adults making important phone calls, to the sound of doors closing and voices dropping low. Ethan ended another fruitless call and slumped into the chair across from Lily. His laptop screen showed dozens of open tabs, government websites, public record searches, social service portals. He'd been at it since dawn, trying to piece together the paper trail of Amelia's life after she disappeared. After he disappeared. "What are you drawing?" he asked, needing a moment of respite from the bureaucratic maze. Lily turned the paper toward him. It showed 3 figures standing in front of what looked like their cottage, surrounded by flowers. "It's us," she said simply. "And Mommy's watching from the sky." Ethan swallowed hard and picked up his phone again. This time he dialed the number for vital records in another state, where he thought Amelia might have lived for a while. As the phone rang, he watched Lily add more flowers to her picture, her face peaceful and focused. The morning wore on, each call leading to another dead end. Amelia had vanished from official records shortly after Lily was born, leaving no trace in any system Ethan could access. It was as if she'd deliberately erased herself from the world's paperwork, existing only in the memories of those who'd known her. By early afternoon, Ethan had compiled a list of addresses from Amelia's obituary. The most recent was an apartment complex on the east side of town. He called the cottage's neighbor, a kind elderly woman who'd introduced herself that morning, and asked if she could keep an eye on Lily for an hour. "I'll be right back," he promised Lily, who nodded without looking up from her latest drawing. "Mrs. Henderson is right next door if you need anything." The apartment complex was a modest 3-story building with faded brick walls and window boxes full of geraniums. The landlord, Mr. Martinez, met Ethan in the small office off the lobby. He was a stocky man in his 60s with kind eyes and paint-stained hands. "Amelia Warren?" Mr. Martinez's face softened at the name. "Yes, I remember her well. Such a quiet tenant, always polite. Paid her rent in cash, right on time." He leaned back in his creaking office chair. "She wasn't here long, maybe 6 months, but she made an impression. Used to help my wife with the building's flower beds." "Did she ever mention—" Ethan hesitated. "Did she talk about Lily's father?" Mr. Martinez nodded slowly. "She spoke sometimes about a man she loved but lost. Never blamed him, though. Said there were things bigger than them both that got in the way." He stood up suddenly. "Wait here." He disappeared into a back room and returned carrying a cardboard box. "We keep tenants' abandoned items for a year before donating them. This was hers." The box contained mostly art supplies, brushes, half-used tubes of paint, sketching pencils. At the bottom, Ethan found a sealed envelope labeled simply, "For him," in Amelia's familiar handwriting. "She was special, that one," Mr. Martinez said softly. "Always seemed like she was waiting for something, or someone." Back in his car, Ethan held the envelope for a long moment before carefully opening it. Inside was a letter and a photograph he'd never seen before, Lily as a baby, tiny and perfect, sleeping in what looked like a hospital bassinet. The image made his chest ache with all the moments he'd missed. The letter was written on simple notebook paper, the ink slightly faded. My dearest Ethan, if this ever reaches you, know that she's everything we dreamed of and more. She has your quiet strength and my restless heart. She draws like I do, sees the world in colors and possibilities. But she has something entirely her own too, a kind of wisdom I can't explain. I won't write about why I had to leave or why I couldn't find you again. Those stories belong to shadows now. Instead, I'll tell you this. She knows she's loved. Every day of her life, she's known that. And she knows about you, not as someone who left, but as someone who was lost. Be better than the silence that separated us. Be the father I know you would have been. All my love, Amelia. Ethan drove back to the cottage with the box beside him, his hands tight on the steering wheel. He found Lily exactly where he'd left her, though now she was reading one of the old children's books they'd found on the shelves. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep on the living room couch, her latest drawing clutched in one hand, Ethan met with his lawyer in her downtown office. He spread out everything he'd found: the photograph, the letter, the locket, Amelia's sketchbook, the documentation of their DNA match. The lawyer, Ms. Chen, examined each item carefully. "This helps," she said finally, looking up at him. "It establishes a narrative, shows intent and connection. But," she sighed, removing her reading glasses, "with no legal birth record, CPS won't look kindly on a man suddenly claiming a child with no proof of consent. They'll want to know why she wasn't registered at birth, why there's no paper trail. These are red flags to them." Ethan looked through the office window toward his car, where he could just make out Lily's sleeping form in the back seat, curled up under the blanket from her new bed. "Then I'll fight," he whispered, his voice firm despite its softness. The afternoon sun warmed the small garden patch beside the cottage, where Ethan and Lily knelt in the soft dirt. Their hands were covered in soil as they carefully dug another hole for a bright yellow marigold. Lily held the delicate plant while Ethan showed her how to pack the earth around its roots. "Gentle like this," he demonstrated, his large hands moving with surprising care. "The flowers need room to grow, but they also need to feel secure." Lily nodded seriously, her face scrunched in concentration as she mimicked his movements. "Like how you tucked me in last night." Ethan's heart squeezed at the simple comparison. "Yeah, exactly like that." When it came time to water their new garden addition, Lily insisted on handling the watering can herself. It was nearly as big as she was, and she wobbled slightly under its weight. "I can do it," she declared, taking careful steps toward the flower. "Okay, but remember to—" Ethan started, but before he could finish, Lily stumbled slightly. The watering can tipped, sending a cascade of water directly onto Ethan's shoes. He let out a surprised yelp that quickly turned into laughter at the sight of his soaked feet. Lily's eyes went wide for a moment before she joined in his laughter, the sound bright and clear in the peaceful afternoon. "Oops," she giggled, setting down the now empty can. "Well, at least my feet needed washing anyway." Ethan chuckled, wiggling his toes in his wet shoes. Their shared laughter was interrupted by 3 sharp knocks at the front door. The sound was official, commanding, nothing like Mrs. Henderson's gentle tapping when she brought over cookies the day before. Ethan felt Lily move closer to him instinctively, her small hand finding his. Through the front window, he could see 2 people standing on the porch, a man and woman in professional attire, both holding folders. His stomach dropped as he recognized the logo on their badges, Child Protective Services. "It's okay," he whispered to Lily, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze, but his heart was racing as he led her to the door. The agents introduced themselves as Ms. Rodriguez and Mr. Thompson from CPS. Their faces were professionally neutral, but their eyes were sharp, taking in every detail of the cottage's interior as Ethan invited them in. We received a report about an undocumented minor living with an unrelated adult at this address, Ms. Rodriguez stated, her tone careful but firm. We need to ask some questions and assess the situation. Lily's grip on Ethan's hand tightened, but she didn't hide behind him as he'd half expected. Instead, she stood straight, her chin lifted slightly, a gesture so reminiscent of Amelia that it made his throat tight. They moved to the living room, where crayon drawings decorated the walls and children's books were stacked neatly on the coffee table. The agent sat on the couch while Ethan and Lily took the armchair across from them. Lily perched on his lap. Mr. Thompson spoke first, his voice gentler as he addressed Lily. "Can you tell us about who you're staying with?" "This is my daddy," Lily answered without hesitation. "We didn't know at first, but we do now." She looked up at Ethan with complete trust in her eyes. "And where did you come from?" Ms. Rodriguez asked, pen poised over her notepad. "I was with Mommy before," Lily explained. "We moved around a lot. Then she got sick, and she told me about Daddy's picture in her locket. She said I'd know him when I saw him." Her voice remained steady, but Ethan could feel her small body tensing against his. The questions continued, gentle but persistent. Where had she lived? Did she go to school? Did she have any other family? Lily answered each one honestly, her responses painting a picture of a life spent in motion, held together by Amelia's love and determination. When the focus shifted to documentation, Ethan was ready. He carefully extracted himself from Lily, asking her to show Mr. Thompson her latest drawings while he spoke with Ms. Rodriguez in the kitchen. There, he spread out everything he'd gathered. The DNA test results, Amelia's letters, the photographs, her sketchbook, the locket, even receipts from stores where he'd bought Lily's new clothes. Ms. Rodriguez examined each item methodically, her expression revealing nothing. "This shows a clear connection," she acknowledged, "but you understand our concern. No birth certificate, no school records, no medical history. It's as if this child didn't exist on paper until very recently." "I know," Ethan said quietly. "Her mother was protecting her from something. I'm still trying to understand what. But that DNA test proves she's mine, and these letters show Amelia's intent for us to be together." "We'll need to review everything thoroughly," Ms. Rodriguez said, gathering the documents. "And I have to be honest. During the investigation, we may need to place Lily in temporary care. It's standard procedure in cases like this." The word temporary hit Ethan like a physical blow. In the living room, he could hear Lily's voice explaining one of her drawings to Mr. Thompson, completely unaware that her world might be about to shift again. After the agents left, promising to be in touch soon, Lily stood in the middle of the living room, looking small and uncertain. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked in a whisper. Ethan dropped to his knees in front of her, pulling her into a tight hug. "You were perfect," he assured her, his voice rough with emotion. "You did absolutely nothing wrong." That night, after finally getting Lily to sleep with 3 bedtime stories and extra hugs, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open and papers spread everywhere. The table lamp cast a warm glow as he methodically built a digital folder of evidence, scanning every drawing, every letter, every receipt. He added photos of Lily's current living conditions, the healthy food in the fridge, the books he'd bought her, her new clothes. He typed up a detailed timeline of everything he could remember about his relationship with Amelia. The accident. His father's interference. He documented every interaction with Lily since she found him at the cemetery, every conversation that showed their growing bond. His fingers moved frantically over the keyboard as the night deepened, driven by the terrifying possibility of losing her. In the bedroom down the hall, Lily slept peacefully, clutching the stuffed rabbit they'd bought together at the store. Her latest drawing sat on the nightstand. 3 figures holding hands under a bright sun. The word, family, written in careful letters across the top. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the narrow hiking trail. Ethan and Lily walked side by side, their footsteps crunching softly on the fallen leaves. The woods were peaceful at this early hour, filled with birdsong and the gentle rustling of branches in the breeze. Lily stopped to examine a patch of wild mushrooms, her small finger pointing but not touching, just as Ethan had taught her. "Look, they're like tiny umbrellas," she said, her voice full of wonder. Ethan knelt beside her, watching her face light up with curiosity. These quiet moments had become precious to him over the past week, moments when they could just be father and daughter, without the weight of uncertainty hanging over them. "I had a dream last night," Lily said suddenly, standing up and brushing dirt from her knees. "Mommy was walking with us, right here in the woods." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "Yeah, what was she doing?" "Just smiling and holding both our hands." Lily kicked at a pine cone, sending it tumbling down the path. "She looked happy that we were together." They walked in silence for a while, the morning light growing stronger. Lily's next words came out barely above a whisper. "If they try to take me, will we run?" Ethan stopped walking, his heart heavy in his chest. He turned to face his daughter, seeing the mix of fear and hope in her eyes. This was the question he'd been dreading, the one he'd asked himself countless times over the past week. "I'll fight for you," he said carefully, choosing his words. "With everything I have. But I won't make you live in hiding." He knelt down to her level. "That wouldn't be fair to you." Lily's face scrunched up in thought, her expression serious beyond her years. After a long moment, she nodded. "Mommy never ran, even when it was hard." She reached for Ethan's hand. "She said being brave means staying even when you're scared." They continued their hike, pointing out interesting rocks and leaves, trying to name the birds they heard. But there was a new weight to their steps, an awareness that their time together might be measured. That evening, after tucking Lily into bed with 2 stories and an extra long hug, Ethan sat in the living room reviewing court documents. The house was quiet except for the gentle ticking of the clock and the distant sound of crickets through the open window. His phone rang, breaking the silence. The caller ID showed his lawyer's number. Ethan's stomach tightened as he answered. "Mr. Cole." His lawyer's voice was professional but carried an undercurrent of concern. "The court date has been set. 1 week from today, 9 a.m. Ethan gripped the phone tighter. "That's soon." "Yes, and I should warn you, they've already identified a potential foster placement. Just in case." The lawyer paused. "It's standard procedure, but you should be prepared." What neither of them knew was that Lily wasn't asleep. She stood in the hallway, hidden in shadow, listening to every word, her small hands balled into fists at her sides, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. After Ethan hung up, Lily crept back to her room. She moved quietly in the dark, pulling her backpack from under the bed. With trembling fingers, she packed her most precious possessions. Her sketchbook filled with drawings of her new life with Ethan, the heart-shaped locket containing the photo of her parents, and the small pouch of flower seeds they'd been planting together. She found a piece of paper and a crayon, writing carefully in the dim light from her window. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to stay." She placed the note on her pillow, arranged her stuffed rabbit next to it, and slipped on her shoes. The window opened without a sound. They'd oiled the hinges just last weekend when it was squeaking. Lily climbed out carefully, just as she'd done many times before with her mother when they needed to move quickly and quietly. The night air was cool against her face as she made her way through the garden, past the flowers they'd planted together. She paused only once, looking back at the warm light in the living room window, where she knew Ethan was still working to keep her. Then she turned and ran into the darkness. It was nearly an hour later when Ethan went to check on Lily before going to bed himself. The empty bed stopped him cold in the doorway. The stuffed rabbit sat propped against the pillow, the note beside it catching his eye immediately. "Lily?" he called out, his voice rising with panic as he searched the room. "Lily?" He ran through the house, checking every room, calling her name with increasing desperation. When he found the partially open window in her room, his heart nearly stopped. Grabbing his phone and a flashlight, he burst out of the house into the night. The beam of light swept across the garden, catching the fresh footprints in the soft dirt. "Lily." His voice echoed through the trees, unanswered. He ran down the street, the flashlight beam dancing wildly as he searched. Every shadow made his heart jump. Every rustle of leaves made him call out again. But there was no response, no small voice answering back. Something made him turn toward the cemetery. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was remembering how often Lily had gone there to feel close to her mother. He ran faster, his breath coming in gasps. The cemetery was silent under the stars, the headstones casting long shadows in the moonlight. Ethan's flashlight beam moved frantically from stone to stone until it finally caught a small figure curled up beside Amelia's grave. Lily lay on her side, her backpack clutched to her chest, whispering words so soft they were almost lost in the night breeze. "I know you said to be brave," she murmured to the cold stone. "I'm trying." The cemetery was silent except for the soft whisper of wind through the trees. In the pale light before dawn, Ethan found Lily curled up beside Amelia's headstone, her small arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Her eyes were red and puffy, but no tears fell now. She looked up at him with an expression that broke his heart, a mixture of fear, determination, and something far too wise for her young years. "I didn't want to go with strangers," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted you to know where I was." Ethan knelt beside her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. The morning dew had soaked through her clothes, and she was shivering slightly in the cool air. The sky was beginning to lighten, turning the darkness into a soft gray that made everything look dreamlike and fragile. "You scared me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. I thought I'd lost you." Lily's fingers traced the letters of her mother's name on the headstone. "Mommy always said this was home, even when we didn't have a real one." Without another word, Ethan scooped her up in his arms. She felt so small, so vulnerable against his chest. Her arms went around his neck automatically, and she buried her face in his shoulder. He could feel her trembling, though whether from cold or emotion he wasn't sure. The walk back to his car was silent, broken only by the sound of his footsteps on the dewy grass and the gradual awakening of birds in the trees. He settled Lily in the passenger seat, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders before starting the drive home. As they drove through the empty streets, Ethan realized it was time. Time for the whole truth. Time to share the weight of their story. He glanced at Lily, who was staring out the window at the passing streetlights. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice gentle but serious. "About what happened. About why I wasn't there." Lily turned to look at him, her eyes wide and attentive in the dim light of dawn. "7 years ago, I was in a car accident," he continued, his hands tightening slightly on the steering wheel. "It was bad. I was in a coma for weeks. When I woke up, I couldn't remember much of anything." He paused at a red light, watching the colors reflect off the wet pavement. "Your mother, Amelia, she came to the hospital every day. But I didn't know. My father, he made sure I never knew. The light turned green, and they moved forward through the empty intersection. There were letters, so many letters from your mother. But my father kept them all, never told me about them. He thought he was protecting me, but he was wrong. So wrong. Lily sat quietly, absorbing every word. Her small hands clutched the edges of Ethan's jacket around her shoulders. I never meant to leave you both, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I never knew about you. If I had... They pulled into the driveway of their house just as the sun was beginning to peek over the horizon. Ethan turned off the engine but didn't move to get out. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, the last unopened letter from Amelia. This was in the box of letters, he said, holding it out to Lily. It has your name on it. Lily took the envelope with trembling fingers. The paper was slightly yellowed, and her name was written in Amelia's familiar flowing handwriting. She carefully opened it, trying not to tear the envelope. The single sheet of paper inside was covered in Amelia's handwriting. Lily unfolded it slowly, her eyes moving across the words. I hope one day you'll have his eyes and his heart, she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. If you find this, I know you already do. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she carefully folded the letter and held it against her chest, right over her heart. Later that morning, Ethan and his lawyer stood before the judge in her chambers, Lily sitting quietly beside them. The room was smaller than a regular courtroom, more intimate, with morning sunlight streaming through tall windows. Ethan's lawyer presented the new evidence, photographs of where they'd found Lily at the cemetery, the DNA test results, and Amelia's letters. He explained Lily's emotional connection to her mother's gravesite, how she'd run there when scared instead of trying to leave town. Your Honor, the lawyer said, this isn't just about legal documentation. This is about a child who has found her father, who has formed a deep emotional bond with him. Removing her now would cause significant trauma. The judge, a woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair, studied the documents carefully. She looked at Lily, who sat straight in her chair, her hand firmly clasped in Ethan's. Mr. Cole, the judge said finally, her voice firm but not unkind. You're not out of the woods yet. There are still legal hurdles to overcome, and we'll need to establish proper documentation for your daughter. She paused, looking directly at Ethan. But you've proven one thing. You're not walking away. Ethan squeezed Lily's hand gently, looking down at their intertwined fingers before meeting the judge's gaze. She's mine, he said, his voice steady and certain. I won't lose her again. The morning sun filtered through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. The hallway smelled of lemon cleaner and anxiety, a sterile emptiness broken only by the occasional echo of footsteps. Ethan knelt before Lily, his fingers working carefully to straighten the small navy cardigan she wore over her yellow dress. She clutched her worn sketchbook against her chest like a shield, her knuckles white with tension. There, Ethan said softly, smoothing down the fabric one last time. Perfect. Lily's eyes darted around the quiet hallway, taking in the imposing wooden doors and the stern-faced adults who passed by. Her small shoulders hunched slightly, but she kept her chin up, just as her mother had taught her. Ethan recognized the gesture. It was pure Amelia, that quiet determination in the face of uncertainty. Are you scared? She whispered, looking up at him with those familiar eyes. Ethan managed a small smile, though his heart was hammering in his chest. A little, he admitted, but that's okay. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. Lily nodded seriously, then pulled a pen from her sketchbook. Taking Ethan's hand, she turned it palm up and began to draw. Her small fingers worked carefully, creating delicate lines across his skin. When she finished, a tiny flower bloomed in the center of his palm, its petals detailed with surprising precision for such young hands. "For strength," she said simply, capping the pen. "Mommy always said flowers can grow anywhere, even in scary places." Ethan's throat tightened as he looked at the small drawing. He closed his fingers gently over it, as if protecting a real bloom. "Thank you," he managed. Inside the courtroom, the air felt heavy with expectation. Lily sat beside Ethan, her feet dangling well above the floor, while their lawyer arranged documents on the table before them. Across the aisle, the CPS representatives sat with their own stack of papers, their faces professionally neutral. The proceedings began with a quiet gravity. The CPS lawyer stood first, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached the judge's bench. Her voice was clear and measured as she laid out their concerns. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge the emotional attachment that is formed between Mr. Cole and the child, we cannot overlook the complete absence of official documentation. No birth certificate has been located. There are no school records, no vaccination records, no healthcare history of any kind. The child, for all intents and purposes, has existed outside the system entirely." She paused, shuffling through her papers. "While we sympathize with Mr. Cole's situation, our primary concern must be the child's welfare and ensuring proper legal protocols are followed." Ethan's lawyer rose next, his movements deliberate and calm. He began laying out their evidence, piece by piece. The DNA results came first, irrefutable proof of Ethan's paternity. Then came Amelia's letters, carefully preserved in clear plastic sleeves, each one telling another piece of their story. Photos were presented. The old carnival snapshot from Lily's locket, Amelia's pregnancy photos found in Richard Cole's hidden shoebox, recent pictures of Lily and Ethan together at their small house. Finally, he presented Amelia's sketchbook. The judge handled it carefully, turning each page with attention. He paused at the drawings of Lily growing up, at the portraits of Ethan drawn from memory, at the imagined family scenes that never came to be. When he reached the final page, the unfinished drawing of Ethan and Lily by their house, he studied it for a long moment, reading Amelia's last note beneath. "If she ever finds you before you find her, no, don't run this time. She's yours too." The lawyer's voice was gentle as he concluded, "Your Honor, we have here not just scientific proof of paternity, but a documented history of a mother's love and hope, of a father unknowingly separated from his child, and of a little girl who has finally found her way home." The judge looked up from the sketchbook, his eyes finding Lily. "Would you like to say something to the court?" he asked kindly. The room fell silent. Lily stood slowly, her small frame straight despite her obvious nervousness. Her voice, when it came, was clear and simple, carrying to every corner of the hushed courtroom. "I didn't have a daddy," she said. "Then I did, and I don't want another one." She sat back down, slipping her hand into Ethan's. He squeezed it gently, fighting back the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. The judge sat back in his chair, reviewing the documents before him one final time. The silence in the courtroom felt like a living thing, pressing in from all sides. Ethan could feel his pulse in his throat, could sense Lily's tension beside him. Finally, the judge leaned forward, removing his glasses. His voice was measured and thoughtful as he spoke. "The law exists to protect children," he began, "to ensure their safety, their welfare, their best interests are served. But sometimes, in our dedication to following procedure, we risk losing sight of what truly matters. He looked directly at Lily and Ethan. "I see no doubt in this child. I see no hesitation in the man who claims her. We need the system to protect children, not separate them from the love they deserve." Picking up his gavel, he continued, "I hereby grant permanent custody of Lily Warren, now to be known as Lily Cole, to her father, Ethan Cole. The court will assist in establishing proper documentation and legal identity." The sound of the gavel seemed to release something in Ethan's chest. Tears spilled down his cheeks as Lily launched herself into his arms, nearly knocking him backward in his chair. He held her tightly, feeling her small body shake with emotion. "We did it," she whispered against his neck, her voice trembling with joy and relief. "We really did it." The late summer breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings through the open windows of the cottage on Maple Lane. Sunlight streamed through newly cleaned glass, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floors that Ethan had spent weekends refinishing. The house, once forgotten and silent, now hummed with life and possibility. Lily stood in the doorway of her new room, her eyes wide with wonder. The walls were a soft yellow. She'd picked the color herself, and floating shelves lined one wall, ready to hold her growing collection of books and treasures. A handmade quilt found in a local antique store covered her bed in patches of blues and yellows that reminded her of wildflowers. But it was the sunroom that made her catch her breath. Ethan had transformed it into a tiny art studio, just for her. An easel stood in the corner where the morning light was strongest. Mason jars filled with her mother's old paintbrushes lined a wooden shelf, their handles worn smooth from years of use. Her own paintings, bright, hopeful splashes of color, were already hung on the walls, alongside some of Amelia's preserved sketches. "Do you like it?" Ethan asked softly, watching from the doorway as Lily ran her fingers over the art supplies arranged on a small table. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then she turned to him, her eyes shining. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's like Mommy's here too." Ethan knelt beside her, touching one of Amelia's old brushes. "She is," he said. "In every color you paint, in every picture you draw. She's right here with us." Later that afternoon, while Ethan unpacked boxes in the kitchen, Lily wandered out to the garden. The summer air was thick with the buzz of bees and the rustle of leaves. She made her way to the small plot where, weeks ago, she and Ethan had buried their first seed together. There, pushing through the rich soil, was a single yellow flower. Small but strong, its petals the exact shade of the sundress she'd worn the day Ethan bought her ice cream. "Daddy!" she called out, excitement making her voice tremble. "Daddy, come look!" Ethan appeared on the back porch, wiping his hands on his jeans. He joined her by the flower bed, crouching down to examine the tiny bloom. "It's beautiful," he said, smiling at her enthusiasm. "Just like your dress." Lily nodded solemnly. "I'm going to name it Hope," she declared. "Because that's what Mommy always said we needed, even when things were hard." Ethan's throat tightened at her words. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "That's perfect," he managed. "Hope it is." They stood together for a moment, watching the small flower dance in the breeze. Then Lily tugged at his hand. "Can we go visit Mommy?" she asked. "I want to show her something." 20 minutes later, they pulled into Rose Hill Cemetery. The trunk of Ethan's car was filled with supplies, paint, brushes, and a small plaque he'd had made weeks ago, but hadn't found the courage to place until now. Lily carried her art bag, determination in every step as they made their way to Amelia's grave. The headstone stood quiet in the afternoon light. Lily set down her bag and began pulling out supplies, bright colors, just like her mother had always used. She worked carefully, her small hands steady as she painted flowers along the edges of the stone. Roses bloomed under her brush, followed by daisies and forget-me-nots. Each petal was placed with love, each color chosen with purpose. Ethan watched her work, amazed at how much she resembled Amelia in that moment. The same look of concentration, the same gentle touch with the brush. When Lily finally stepped back, the headstone had been transformed. No longer stark and gray, it now bloomed with life and color. A celebration rather than a farewell. "Your turn, Daddy," Lily said softly, holding out her hand. Ethan pulled the small plaque from his bag. Together they secured it at the base of the headstone. The words caught the light. "Forever missed. Forever found." Lily traced the letters with her finger. "She would like that," she said confidently. She always said the best things are worth waiting for. Back home, as evening settled over their cottage, music drifted softly through the kitchen. Lily stood on a chair at the counter, her face scrunched in concentration as she measured flour for cookies. Ethan watched in amusement as she dumped the cup into the bowl, sending a white cloud into the air. "Oops," she giggled, flour dusting her nose and cheeks. "Oops is right," Ethan laughed, wiping a smudge from her chin. He wasn't doing much better himself. His dark hair was spotted with white, and his shirt looked like it had been through a snowstorm. They worked together, mixing and rolling, cutting shapes with the cookie cutters they'd found in an old box. The kitchen filled with the warm smell of vanilla and butter, mixing with the soft melody playing from the radio. It felt like home, really felt like it for the first time in both their lives. While the cookies baked, Lily sat at the kitchen table with her sketchbook. Her tongue stuck out slightly as she drew, completely absorbed in her work. Ethan watched her while he cleaned up, his heart full with a happiness he'd never thought possible. Finally, Lily held up her drawing. "Look," she said proudly. The picture showed their garden full of flowers and color. In the sky above, drawn with careful detail, was Amelia, smiling down at the two figures below. Ethan recognized himself and Lily, standing hand in hand among the blooms, a small yellow flower prominent in the foreground. "That's Hope," Lily explained, pointing to the flower. "And that's Mommy, watching over us." She paused, looking at her drawing thoughtfully. "She told me once that love waits, even when it's hard, even when it takes a long time." She looked up at Ethan, her eyes wise beyond her years. She was right, wasn't she? Ethan pulled her into a tight hug, not caring that they were both still covered in flour. "Yes," he whispered into her hair. She was absolutely right. The timer dinged, and the smell of fresh cookies filled the kitchen. Outside their window, the garden swayed in the evening breeze, Hope's yellow petals catching the last rays of sunlight. Inside, father and daughter stayed wrapped in their embrace, finally perfectly home. The autumn morning carried a crisp chill as Ethan helped Lily into her new backpack. The straps were still stiff, and the bright yellow fabric hadn't yet acquired the worn comfort of regular use. He adjusted the shoulders for what felt like the 100th time, his fingers trembling slightly as he checked and rechecked the zippers. "Is it too heavy?" he asked, watching her shift from foot to foot on their front porch. The weight of this moment, her first day of school, pressed against his chest. Lily shook her head, her braids swinging. She wore the dress they'd picked out together, navy blue with tiny yellow flowers that matched her backpack. Her new shoes gleamed white in the early morning light. Everything was new, everything was beginning. They walked hand in hand down Maple Lane past the garden where hope still bloomed alongside newer flowers they'd planted together. The morning air was alive with the sound of other children and parents making their way to school, all part of this familiar ritual that felt so foreign to both of them. At the school gate, Ethan knelt down to Lily's level, brushing an imaginary speck of dust from her collar. Her eyes, so like his own, held a mixture of excitement and uncertainty that made his heart ache. "You'll still be here after school, right?" she asked, her small fingers gripping the straps of her backpack. The question carried the weight of their past, of separation, of loss, of finding each other again. Ethan placed his hands on her shoulders, steady and sure. "Always," he replied, his voice firm with promise. "I'll be right here waiting when that bell rings." Lily threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tight. He held her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the lingering sweetness of their breakfast toast. When she pulled back, her smile was brighter, more confident. "I love you, Daddy," she said, then turned and walked through the gate, her yellow backpack bobbing among the crowd of other children. Ethan watched until she disappeared into the building, his heart simultaneously swelling with pride and constricting with protective worry. This was what normal felt like, this beautiful, terrifying act of letting go just enough to let her grow. The months that followed brought change to their lives in gentle waves. Ethan's decision to sell his tech firm hadn't been difficult. The endless meetings and constant travel no longer fit the life he wanted to build with Lily. Instead, he channeled his resources and expertise into creating a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting displaced children like Lily had been. He worked from home now, converting one of the cottage's spare rooms into an office that balanced both his work and his role as a father. The wall behind his desk told their story in frames. Amelia's last letter hung in the center, her graceful handwriting preserved behind glass. "If you find this, I know you already do." Beside it was Lily's first drawing of their family, 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright sun. The frames spread outward from there, photos of Lily's first day of school, art projects she brought home, moments of their new life together captured and preserved. One sunny afternoon, they spread a checkered blanket in their backyard for an impromptu picnic. October painted the maple trees in shades of gold and red, and the air was sweet with the scent of fallen leaves. Lily sat cross-legged on the blanket, carefully arranging the sandwiches she'd helped make, peanut butter and jelly cut into perfect triangles. "I made something for you," she said, reaching into her ever-present art folder. She pulled out a painting, holding it up with pride. Ethan's breath caught as he looked at it. She'd captured them standing at the gates of their cottage, their hands linked together. The path beneath their feet wound upward through the paper, leading to a brilliant star that seemed to shine with its own light. He recognized Amelia in that star, watching, guiding, loving them still. "That's Mommy's star," Lily explained, tracing the path with her finger. "See? We can always find our way to her, and she can always find her way to us." Ethan pulled her close, the painting held carefully between them. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "Just like you. Just like her." They spent the afternoon in the gentle autumn sunshine, sharing sandwiches and stories. Lily told him about her friends at school, about the library books she was reading, about the art teacher who said she had a special gift. Ethan listened, savoring every word, every laugh, every moment of this simple, precious time together. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across their yard, they packed up the blanket and headed inside. The evening routine flowed smoothly now. Homework, bath time, story time. Lily's room glowed warm and cozy in the lamplight as Ethan tucked her into bed. Her eyes were heavy with sleep, but she smiled as he pulled the quilt up to her chin. "This is the life Mommy wanted for me," she whispered, her voice thick with contentment and drowsiness. Ethan leaned down and kissed her forehead, his heart full to bursting. "Then we'll make sure it never ends," he promised. He watched as her eyes drifted closed, her breathing evening out into the peaceful rhythm of sleep. For a moment, he sat there, watching his daughter dream, marveling at how completely she had changed his world. Finally, he stood and walked quietly to the back door. The night air was cool and clear as he stepped outside. Above him, stars pierced the darkness, thousands of them, bright and eternal. He found himself looking up at them, searching for the brightest one, the one that seemed to shine just for them. "I'm home, Amelia," he said softly to the night sky. The words carried all the weight of their journey. The loss, the finding, the healing, the love. In the gentle darkness, surrounded by the home they'd built together, Ethan felt the truth of it deep in his soul. He was home. They both were. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan and Lily, I hand-picked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.